Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jesse Burst. I'm the chairman of the Smart Cities Council. I'll be your moderator today as we talk about performance excellence in electricity renewal, the PEER program. We want to talk about why PEER, what's the point, what's the basis for this, why and how can it be so transformational. Then we're going to talk about some of the PEER fundamentals to really help you understand whether and how you could and should get involved. We're going to introduce our presenters. First, David Chiesa, who is the Senior Director of Business Development at S&C Electric. David began his career in the United States Army. He served as a maintenance company commander and aide-de-camp, and he was the U.S. Forces Maintenance Manager for the NATO troops in Bosnia. I guess I'll just point out at this point that Alexander Hamilton was also an aide-de-camp, in his case for General Washington, so maybe we'll see David's face on a $20 bill someday. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the United States Military Academy and an MBA from the University of Maryland. He's a certified Master Black Belt in the Six Sigma, and he's an active member of IEEE and a number of other professional associations. Also with us, Jamie Statter. She's the Vice President of Strategic Relationship at the U.S. Green Building Council and GBCI, and she'll introduce GBCI to you here in just a moment. She comes to USGBC from the Clinton Global Initiative, where she worked on market-based approaches for climate change and infrastructure development. And before that, she worked on a number of climate issues for various foundations and advocacy organizations. She's a graduate of Tulane University from New Orleans, so I'm assuming she's going to bring some Mardi Gras spirit to our discussion this morning. Her Master's of Public Policy comes from Johns Hopkins University. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with David. He's going to talk a little bit about why PEER can be so transformational for a city, for a municipal utility, but also for a campus, for a hospital, for an office, for an industrial park, or a real estate development. As you'll see, it can be applied on a large scale or a small scale. And I think it's just such an important topic. We all know that we need to modernize our power system, but how do you know where to start? How do you know where you are weak and strong right now so you know where to start? And I think equally, how do you take a holistic systems view and so you can sort of balance when and where you're aiming your efforts, and then how do you measure progress, and how do you prove to your constituents that you're keeping your promises and making problems? These are some of the things, just some of the things that PEER can help you with, as we'll hear. So David, why don't you kick it off for us?
All right, thanks, Jesse. Appreciate it. Great introduction, and geez, I would love to be on the $20 bill. But actually, I'd really like to have more $20 bills and beyond one. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about smart cities and then the relationship into PEER. So for me and for S&C Electric Company, we look at smart cities as one of the things that is an outcropping of this development called SmartGrid and all these other smart things that people are talking about. But it's also the environment associated with our changing technology world, where the Internet of Things and everything's more connected than it was. But the problem is that all looks like a big old tangle of vines. How do you get in there and figure out exactly what it is that you should do first? What should you do second? And how far down that road should you go in each one of those categories? And so when we look at this, smart cities is going to be a transformational way of living in the 21st and the 22nd century, and it's going to be a transformational way of the way that citizens live, work, earn, and love in their areas that they choose to live in, be they small cities, medium-sized cities, or very large cities. They're going to demand more. And to kind of feel what that demand looks like, smart cities is as a focal point for that. And so one of the things that S&C looks at and says, if we're going to go to a smart city where we're going to have water and wastewater and transportation, health and energy all connected, all immediately available for both observation and manipulation at an individual level, you're going to have a smart infrastructure. There's nothing that goes on inside that area that doesn't start with the ability to produce power and the ability to communicate. Those are the two things that you're going to have to be able to do that. And even the communications part requires electricity. Electricity is really, if you'll forgive me, the spark that makes all of this work, right? And that's what we look at as a smart infrastructure, a smart city, all the things that we want to see about how we live, work, and breathe. Really, those are going to require a robust electrical infrastructure to be able to be what we all want them to be. And so when we look at smart cities, how does it start? It starts with a robust electrical infrastructure, which brings us to where we're at with S&C, which is to start with, how do I know what my city has, right? And this is one of those questions where if you ask somebody in City A, geez, are you guys a smart city? More often than not, the people look at it and go, well, we think we are, or we might be, or yes, we definitely are, or in most cases, we certainly want to be, but we don't know if we are or not. And that's really the crux of the issue is, how do you figure it out, right? If you need a robust electrical infrastructure, well, define robust, right? And you can define robust any number of ways, but the idea is that there's levels, right? There's areas that you can look at. Some are certainly going to be more robust than others, so it's important to figure out who's defining this term smart city. How do I know when I've gotten there, right? And then as it iterates, how do I know that I've achieved the next iteration of it? And then who's measuring it, right? There's a lot of adages about the fox in the hen house and others. If you measure it yourself, are you truly getting the best measurement that you can? And this is where, to us, that coalescence, that convergence of the Smart Cities Council, where S&C is a founding member because we recognize the need for smart cities, and maybe even more than the need, the growing trend that's going to happen. We're a founding member there. We're also a founding member in terms of peer. And the reason why we do that is because we think that peer provides the answer to some of these questions. So let's take these one at a time. I know I flashed all three of them up there on the screen at you at once and you want to read ahead, but let's take the first one. You need an independent arbiter. You need somebody that isn't you to actually figure out, have you achieved the changes and upgrades that you said that you wanted to achieve? It gives you an opportunity to do that first bullet there that says prove your competency. So somebody is going to have to tell you that you can go ahead and do a smart city, or you can do one phase of a smart city as you're progressing towards the ultimate goal. And when you have a third-party arbiter in there to say, yes, you've achieved that, that has a whole lot more gravitas than someone looking at it and saying, yep, we've done it. When you have a standard that you work towards and you have somebody evaluating that, it really helps your credibility when you're going and asking for additional money. The other thing it gives us is, if you ask state to state, if you asked a utility, so is your SAFE, your system average interruption frequency index, right? How does that compare to this utility in a different state on the other side of the country? Well, the answer is you can compare those numbers, but those numbers are defined by the commerce commissions or the utility commissions in each one of those states, and typically they're slightly different. One may say that a duration index is based off of a 2-minute outage. One may say it's a 5-minute outage. Another may come back and say it's a 30-second outage. So even though you have what seemingly look like standardized measurements that utilities can compare themselves to, and therefore cities, because they're constituents of that utility, can compare themselves to, in reality, those may not actually be standardized measurements. So an independent arbiter coming in and looking at that and rating you against a standard, that standard being the same across all entities, that starts to provide some ability to measure and provide comparisons for the marketplace. And it all leads into the second part of the creating a standard to build as a requirement for progress. And one of my favorite bullets in this one, it does provide standardization and allows us to get back to the standardized method for measuring like I talked about in the first one. But the one at the end, need to end the research cycle. At some point, smart cities become the way that we do things. They become the way that we exist. And so at some point you have to say, we're done researching, we have a defined standard that we know works. And so when you have peer coming in and providing that standard, it helps us kick out of the research cycle and into the application cycle, which is where we all really want to get as we're going through this, because it's great to do research and it's a necessary part of it, but at some point you have to break that and get out an application. And then the last one, the key thing that I want you to take away from this portion of the presentation, it's the reason that SNC, when we were a founding member of the Smart Cities Council, it's why we formed the Utilities Committee within the Smart Cities Council, is because it's really about electrical infrastructure. If you want to have a smart city, but you don't have a robust, strong, well-developed electrical infrastructure supporting it, street lights won't work, your smart evaluations of your water and wastewater won't work. All these things require that strong, robust electrical network or infrastructure. And so that's what we're really talking about. PEER helps us develop that for the Smart Cities Council, but the idea is, you have to be able to have that to get smart. So the next thing that I want to ask you on this is your call to action. It boils down to a screening, and we want to get started. We want to start helping you as soon as we can. And so one of the things that SNC does as part of our involvement in both PEER and the Smart Cities Council is we provide screenings to evaluate your town, your city, your campus, your facility in terms of the application of PEER to that organization. So there's 2 points of contact there. There's my contact and Jamie's contact. You'll get it again at the end of the presentation, but we would love for you to contact us and start talking about and schedule a screening so that we can tell you where you're at in comparison to the standards associated with a smart city. Thanks. Jesse, I'll turn it back over to you or take questions, whatever you like.
Thank you, David. So we've been hearing from David Chiesa of SNC Electric as we talk about performance excellence in electricity renewal, the PEER program. We're going to turn to Jamie in just a moment, but David, before we do that, you mentioned the screening process. How long is that typically, and how involved is that for an entity?
Well, it depends on the size of the entity. If we're talking about a municipal utility, and I believe Jamie's going to talk a little bit about the EPB Chattanooga, so in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that took a few months to evaluate an entire municipal utility. But it can take as few as a few weeks to evaluate a college campus or a smaller commercial and industrial complex.
So as you're going around, David, you're talking to utilities, to cities, to other organizations about this new program. What's the initial reaction then? Is it skepticism? Is it confusion? Is it interest?
Well, it's actually, I love the words you use, Jesse. It's a little of all of that. It starts off with skepticism in terms of, well, why would we need that? And then you start sharing some of the insights associated with why you need that and how it's going to help the utilities define the problem or define where they're at in terms of providing the solution that really brings the utilities around. There's very few utilities that we've talked to in depth about this that aren't at least intrigued by the idea of having a standard to build to, because one of the things that frustrates the utility is they'll have a constituent city come to them and say, we want to be a smart city. And the utility is responsible for their electrical infrastructure. That municipality doesn't own it themselves. And so then they can start with the PEER program, they can start having a dialogue about how they're providing the aspects, the electrical aspects, the electrical infrastructure aspects of a smart city to that particular municipality. And that really helps spur the discussion. And again, it gives them a standard that they can talk to, not a created standard out of the air, but a proven standard based off of real design principles. And so the interest has been pretty strong after you overcome the initial skepticism, because that anytime you introduce a new measurement system, people think that the measurement system is out there to prevent them from success. Well, in this case, it's out there to help them achieve success, define it, and then provide that third-party verification that it's been achieved.
Terrific. And of course, once you know where you are, you're still in control over where you go next, how fast you move, and so on. But now you've got a great assessment. Thanks, David. That was very helpful. So if David has convinced us that it's worth our time to pay attention, then the next order of business is let's drill down a little bit, find out a little bit more what this is all about and what your involvement might look like. And to help us with that, here's Jamie Statter of the U.S. Green Building Council. Jamie?
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, David, as well. We're thrilled to be able to partner with SNC. Has been tremendous for us, and obviously always following David is easier said than done. So I want to start by just saying who we are. The Green Business Certification, Inc. is probably best known as the certifying body of the LEED rating system. LEED, of course, looks at green buildings and provided that definitional element to green buildings, much like we're trying to do with PEER in the energy space. But just so you have a sense of the portfolio that we're now working with, we are the certifying body for LEED and will continue to be. We actually are certifying, if you believe it or not, 1.85 million square feet of space a day to LEED. So for a program that's just
fabulous.
Yeah, for just about 20 years old, thinking about the impact that that's had in the marketplace, 285,000 LEED credentials have been earned. So again, I just like to put that into context as we're talking about rolling out new programs. So we'll talk today about PEER, but I just wanted to also highlight that we're now the certifying body for WELL, which looks at the health performance of places and spaces, GRESB, which is the portfolio level rating system, looks at entire commercial real estate portfolios, and is really a strong tool for institutional investors, sites, which is on landscapes, and then EDGE, which is new building construction in the developing world and in sustainability. So why do we do all this? Because we are looking at how to generate this triple bottom line approach, which aims to find the most impactful ways to create change in the built environment for sustainability and high performance. Now, diving deep into PEER, as David was referencing, PEER is very much meant to be a tool for others to use and for us to serve as a third-party verification of the work that others are doing. It is the first ever rating system that looks at an entire system's performance. It is divided into 4 credit categories, which are reliability and resiliency, operational effectiveness, customer contribution, and energy efficiency and environment. Under each of those categories, there's a total of 65 or so credits that a project can achieve. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. The system was organized and developed over the course of many years with many experts involved from the energy and utility space and beyond. It really is focused on outcomes and capabilities, and you'll hear me reference that over and over. This is a performance-based standard. It is not a design standard, which is one of those things that's very much spoken about in terms of LEED, that it is a design standard. LEED is also moving towards performance. PEER is more so far down the performance scale, it almost leaves LEED in the dust in that regard. It is developed based on credible and consensus-driven processes, and it really emphasizes this continuous improvement and systems thinking. So again, to recap here, the rating system that is PEER looks at the entire energy chain, generation, transmission, and distribution. And the reason that we're in this business is because LEED looks at what's on the right of your screen, the facilities, and we truly believe that a building or a facility is only as green as the power that goes into it. So once again, the main goal with this rating system is to create a common language for stakeholders to build sustainable electricity systems. And I think this is something that we've seen repeatedly in many different spaces, but especially as David was referencing in the case of smart cities, there are so many different types of people involved in the question of, I want a smart city, I want to be involved in the electricity system. And everyone speaks a different language. Some people are speaking financial languages, some are more technical, and everyone has different needs and wants. So PEER is very much intended to allow people to build around a common standard. In the case of smart cities, digging a little bit deeper, it should create a uniform measurement and reporting processes. It allows you to leverage existing data. Smart cities wouldn't be smart if it weren't for modern technology, so PEER is very much set up to leverage and prioritize modern technology. It enhances decision-making rigor and then holds everyone accountable through the third-party verification process. And then once again, it helps groups identify desired outcome, preferred processes, and facilitates that multi-stakeholder process. So if you think about how you actually leverage PEER in a project level, you can identify where some gaps are in your performance in terms of risk and shortcomings, establish benchmarks, and then improve to those benchmarks, prioritize upgrades, and then truly you'll hear this emphasized over and over, eliminate waste. If we're looking at how PEER is set up, it leverages a microgrid architecture that then drills down from the national level to the state level to local and facility level approaches. So when we're looking at Smart Cities, we're looking at everything on the right side of your screen and how we actually improve that performance. The rating system is designed, as I said, it has 4 credit categories, but all of the credits fall under either design, behaviors, or performance-based outcomes. And the reason I like to emphasize this is, once again, we go back to this important trend of shifting the focus to performance. So what does this look like in practice? We have capabilities of the system. You can get points for example, islanding, protected infrastructure, renewable generation, demand reduction, district energy, load shifting, auto restoration, and grid services, all of which we'll see as we dive deeper into the rating system itself. And then, of course, the performance outcomes that flow from this. You can see reductions on the side of capital waste reduction, interruption reduction, peak demand reduction, and then improvements on the resiliency side. So at this point, what I would like to do is dive into the rating system, and I'm going to do this not based on the credit categories, but rather on elements of sustainable electricity delivery. So the rating system, as you'll see, really looks at all of these components and then creates credits in various categories to ensure that sustainability of the electricity system is prioritized throughout. So the first and probably most obvious is environmental impact reduction. So when we actually dive into the rating system, you'll see the slide repeated a few times as we talk through this. On the left side of your screen, once again, we've got those behaviors, design, performance. And then on the top, those are the credit categories. So looking at environmental impact reduction, because this is such an important component of a sustainable electricity system, this is distributed throughout the rating system in various ways. Percent local renewable and clean generation we'll see repeated again, and that is obviously a very important component. You also get credits based on the intensity of carbon, NOx, and SOx of your source energy. CHP and district energy are both awarded in this system as well. The next category is excellent reliability and power quality. So when we look at this and how this is laid out in the rating system, this really does live under reliability and resiliency and references some of the things that David was talking about. The SAIDI and SAFE are important credits in this category. Alternate supply and auto restoration are some design capabilities that I like to emphasize as well. Looking at what the system actually looks like in that regard when you leverage that type of approach, we've got smart switches, smart loops, and then obviously the ability to ensure that if one side of a system goes down, something else can pick up for it. Equally important and related, obviously, is resiliency and safety focus, which is the next element of electricity delivery that we like to talk about here. So when you look in the rating system on this one, I think it's really important to emphasize here that for the first time we have a metrics-based approach to the concept of resiliency in electricity delivery, and that's something that can be a word that has a lot of jargon associated with it. So what we've identified and what the peer rating system identifies as important components of resiliency include islanding capability, again, auto restoration. Another very important thing is this protection of critical loads. So the rating system actually asks that you identify your critical loads and essential services and go forth and protect those. So again, because of the elements associated with resiliency that it is quite jargony, I like to drill down a little bit here and talk about what this means in practice for a peer project. So with the lessons learned from some of the major natural disasters that we've seen in this country and abroad, this section is really informed by those. So again, identify critical and essential needs. A project should have 3 weeks of fuel supply for essential services, isolation, shift switching, and load shedding, power system hardening, that's physical attributes of the system as a result of their work around the peer standard and or to improve resiliency. The next component is waste elimination and value stream identification, and this is exceptionally interesting in this regard. Is when we were looking at LEED, and again, with LEED having evolved over 20 years, it took quite a bit of time to identify the value associated with the LEED certified building. Not that it wasn't anecdotal and it wasn't obvious to the folks inhabiting it, but in terms of actual monetary value, it took some time. We are now lucky to have many studies that point to the economic performance of a building because of its LEED certification, higher rents, tenant demand, in the case of homeowners, reduced O&M, in the case of large commercial building owners, reduced O&M. But what we wanted to do with PEER is actually embed this conversation business case in the rating system itself, and the designers of PEER did this incredibly well through what we call a value gap analysis. So the value gap is intended to identify the baseline performance of a system, then identify the value associated with that performance, and then, of course, the gap in the performance by not performing at upper levels. And we'll revisit this, but very much what David was speaking about in the previous section is around this concept of screening to find your value. So the next element of sustainable electricity delivery is this participation of customers. And I should note here that this is incredibly important to the founders of PEER. Bob Galvin, who was one of the early supporters of the rating system, and its development emphasized how important it was for customers to be engaged in the process and to be able to value energy assets much like they would value other resources. Participation of customers, as you will see, sits in the mostly in the customer contribution category of the rating system. It looks at dynamic pricing, access to real-time data, interconnection standards, net metering, energy management systems, and again, that % local demand response, % local renewable, and % local clean. There is demand response capability emphasized in here as well. We've now skipped ahead to the final element of this rating system, which is continuous improvement planning. Looking at this, once again, this performance of the system is prioritized in PEER. Advanced metering infrastructure is a prerequisite. Power quality is a huge component, and access to real-time data really moves the system beyond where it currently exists into, again, that leveraging modern technologies. So as we sit back and look at what this means in practice, we'll go to the next slide, which is PEER application. We can think about how you would actually apply PEER throughout the process of a project. So you can apply PEER in the performance planning, so thinking about performance goals, concept design, feasibility study, and designing the business case, as I said, through that value gap analysis. You then allow, whether it's at a city or a small campus within the city, an individual substation, the PEER process can be used to put all of the stakeholders and the contractors, subcontractors, suppliers into the same mindset for project development. And then eventually, once the project is developed, be certified. And finally, you go through the implementation process and you start monitoring evaluation, continuous improvement planning, and then eventually recertification. So what does this look like in practice? Again, PEER can be used for an existing project. And in an existing project, we mean very much either a city or a campus or anything in between. We ask the question, how is this project performing? And is it ready for certification? And that is the screening that David was talking about. If the answer is no, we enter the project into improvement planning. And you would then work with the relevant stakeholders, contractors, companies, et cetera, to do the improvements to be able to achieve certification as well as meet your other long-term goals related to being a smart, sustainable system. And then apply for certification to verify your results through a third-party system. Moving to the other side of the screen, PEER can also be used as a design and development tool in the case of a new project. So what we mean by new project here at home in the U.S. is if there is the interest in building a new microgrid or a significant upgrade to the point where you're basically starting from scratch, PEER can be used to design and develop that project. In the case of international applications, we will likely be seeing PEER used as a design and development tool for an entire city. So as this constituency knows, India and China is rapidly developing, and they aren't the only ones. And many companies, organizations, and governments are looking at tools that can be used to facilitate the development of smart city infrastructure, and PEER is well poised to do that. So again, The next important thing here is that you can use the peer screening to find your gap in performance. And what does that mean? That means that a group comes in, like S&C, or working in partnership with GBCI, although we certainly don't need to be involved, to evaluate the performance of a project and how it rates in relation to the peer standard, but also around, again, those elements of sustainable electricity delivery. Peer can be used for a city, as we've referenced. It can be used for a supply project, and it can be used for a campus. I want to now talk about our existing certified projects. We have two certified projects that I like to talk about at this juncture. One is a campus, and that's the University of Texas at Austin. The second is the entire city of Chattanooga, the entire municipal utility, as David referenced. So if we look at Austin and Austin's performance, Austin is officially the first peer certified project. Austin produces an estimated annual value of almost $15.4 million per year from its energy system. Its power reliability is 80% higher than Austin Energy's larger grid. It's pretty unbelievable, and it has the ability to automatically switch to external power supply and easily transfer from the grid to islanding. So what that means is that the campus has the ability to automatically disconnect and reconnect back to the grid. Its system efficiency is 87%. So in terms of what that means for the campus itself, they're operating at such a high level of efficiency that their gap in performance is quite low, meaning that they're saving the campus and the operators of the campus millions and millions of dollars a year because of this improved performance. It also means that in the case of an emergency, while the larger Austin Energy grid could go down, UT is able to more or less stay online for extended periods of time. So that's UT. The next one, which is incredibly relevant for this group, is Chattanooga. Chattanooga is the first peer certified municipal utility, and what that actually means for this city is that they have been able to leverage innovative technologies, information technologies, and the like to more or less build the first smart city or smart grid in the country. It has therefore attracted businesses to relocate their operations to Chattanooga, and it is something that the city itself is so proud of. The third-party verification of this process through peer is another component of this, in that the city is able to say, we're not just saying we're smart, we have third-party verification and an actual scorecard to go with it. And now they know where to do improvements, et cetera, as a result. But just to go through some of their stats like we did with UT, Chattanooga measures the power quality of 100% of their consumers at individual meters. The carbon, SOx, and NOx intensity is, for each of those, ranging from 20 to 30% lower than the greater state of Tennessee. 99% of customers in Chattanooga have access to real-time data, and all of the distribution circuits in the EPB territory have the ability to operate on an alternative power source. So pretty remarkable. If you're a business and thinking about where to locate, knowing you have that level of reliability and obviously can also meet some of your sustainability goals as a result is pretty remarkable. So with that, I'm going to pause. And Jesse, I know that you have some questions and others have some questions, and so we can talk about how you get involved with peer either via partnership, participation, or education. But I do want to give everyone a chance to ask some questions and be interactive.
Jamie. Yeah, thank you. Let's do that for a moment. Let's pause. So we're talking with Jamie Statter of the U.S. Green Building Council about PEER, the Performance Excellence in Electricity Renewal Program. And I did want to make the comment, Jamie, that the University of Austin, having that kind of an ultra-reliable microgrid is not just so that the kids can keep playing video games in their dorm rooms. You know, a big research university like that may have all sorts of biological samples and refrigeration. It may have advanced computing facilities where lengthy power loss could really be devastating. They've got the job of feeding and caring for and having safe lighting and all the other things for all the people on campus. So that level of reliability is important across so many dimensions. So first question is, I sign up for the program, I get an assessment. what happens with that? Is that mine for my use, or is USGBC going to show up and nail a big report card onto my front door? Tell me about the privacy of the findings.
Well, that's a great question. So again, the process starts with this screening where you actually evaluate your current performance. That is very much done as a tool for the owners, operators, and their partners and contractors to evaluate their performance and create a plan for improving to ultimate levels of performance. In terms of going through the certification process, yes, it is intended to actually quantify your system and create a scorecard as a result. Now, what that looks like in terms of publishing that scorecard or making that available to others is completely up to the customer. But we do want to foster a sense of transparency in the energy markets, much like exists in other markets. And energy is a little bit unique in that regard, that there isn't this scorecard associated with system-wide performance. So with LEED, as many people know, you can be certified silver, gold, platinum, and a lot of people know what that means. Right now for Pure, it's just certified or not, and you do get a score based on those credits that I went through.
Terrific. So the next question would be, as you build this out, do you foresee comparisons? Will I someday be able to compare myself to mid-sized municipal utilities serving cities of 150,000 or less, or some kind of way to slice the data and look at maybe anonymized data from other similar installations? Do you foresee that kind of comparison?
Yes, for sure. And I think that is one of the main goals of the Pure rating system in the long run. And that is not only for cities to be able to compare themselves to others, which is incredibly valuable, but also for consumers and businesses can make decisions based on that performance. So I think one vision that Bob Galvin had when he got involved in this space was he one day saw people being able to decide where they wanted to live because of their energy system. Yes. And that seems like a long way off, but this is the first step in that process.
Oh, terrific. And then my final question, and then we can keep moving. Costs. Tell me a little bit about what are the direct costs, fees, and so forth, and also just a sense of what are the indirect costs in terms of the number of people I'll need to involve. And let's use a municipal utility like Chattanooga as our example. I understand it might be different for a campus, but for that group, what are my typical direct and indirect costs?
So this is where I like to sort of defer a bit, and partially that's because Pure is so new that the sample size that we're working with here is one or two in terms of cost to a municipal utility. We do have at least one other that we've certified that isn't just yet public. But these are systems that were already performing at pretty high levels before Pure got involved. So in terms of actual cost of improvement, that's going to vary based on the system's existing performance and where they want to get to. The contractors they work with, where they're situated in the world that is, and how much there is to do. So it's pretty impossible for us to make an estimate in terms of what it looks like for doing the actual work to get to that upper level of performance and be able to be certified. And I think to some extent David might have some thoughts on this as well as someone who's actually an implementer of those improvements. But in terms of cost of certification, just like with LEED, it's based on size of the system. For municipal utility, we're at an early enough juncture that we're working directly with cities to identify the size of their project, whether it be the entire muni or campuses or quote-unquote campuses within, and then pricing that accordingly based on a formula we've established. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone on the phone who's interested in learning more about pricing.
Okay. Well, let's continue on then. Thank you.
Great. I just want to go a little bit into a case study of what a screening actually looks like. So looking specifically at one of those very critical assets in any city, and that is the airports. Airports are, in the case of emergency, obviously pretty essential to get people in and out. It provides opportunities for people to have a shelter of last resort if it is set up in that way. So right now we're looking at what this actually looks like in practice, and I won't read this aloud to you, but this is the existing performance. The peak demand is about 32 megawatts. There's natural gas-fired boilers, diesel backup, district steam, and chilled water. this is exactly what we were talking about. This is the SAIDI score. So what we can do, what S&C can do, is actually benchmark this particular airport's performance to local, state, regional, and national SAIDI metrics. And then we actually can do that in terms of environmental impacts as well. So you see the existing performance for carbon, NOx, SOx, water, and then what does that mean in terms of peer points? That's at the bottom of this slide. So once again, what we're looking at here is the value gap analysis. What is the baseline performance, the value produced? What is the gap left on the table by not performing at upper levels of performance? And then what is that path for improvement? So this is where it gets really exciting. Using the peer screening process, you're able to identify specific recommendations to minimize that gap and improve the value. So in the case of this hypothetical airport, and again, I should probably note that this is all created by using real data of an airport and then making it hypothetical by manipulating it. So this shouldn't represent any project that you're familiar with, but it should be representative of this sector. So the main recommendations is switch to real-time pricing and then adopt a technology suite that includes 5-megawatt turbine and everything else that's listed under here, including a master controller, automated demand response, and a high-efficiency reciprocating engine. So taking that technology suite, we then are able to identify what the value of that technology suite would be and how long it would take to pay for that. So in this case of the hypothetical airport, we estimate that the airport would be able to save 40% costs with a simple payback in 6 years.
And this is without accounting for carbon, right? There's no carbon price in
There's no carbon price included in this. That's correct.
Right.
So without even starting to think about policy implications of individual states, cities, countries, and how much a market like that would create, this is just with using that technology suite. And again, I think it's really important to emphasize here that peer doesn't require that you do all of these things to achieve certification. In all likelihood, this airport could achieve certification by doing one or more. But what this analysis does, what the screening does, is allows for you to prioritize different interventions and technologies so that you and everybody else is on the same page in terms of what we want to do for cost, what we want to do for environment, in terms of make the project very much smart. So the next slide, this actually maps out what the dollar per megawatt savings are of those individual technologies, so the cost reduction opportunities. And I'll just linger here for a minute. That again, this is an ability to make decisions and think about where you can go from here. So this slide is what that slide I've put up several times on the value gap actually looks like when you put it for a real project. So you've got a baseline, you've got the value performed, and then you see the gap. And so all of these recommendations exist to fill that gap. We also use the screening to identify improvement areas. How do you actually identify what those are and what that means? And I'm going to go on to the 2 next slides, which are quite text-heavy, just to give you a sense of what this would look like if you were to perform this on your system. So you would get back a report that said, what is this area? We've got safety, risk management, and failure elimination. What is it currently capable of? And how do you identify improvement strategies for that? So this is true for all of those categories that were listed on the previous slide, but really goes into depth. And again, the whole point of this is that it used mutually agreed upon criteria of sustainable electricity performance, of what it is to be a smart grid, and then creates an improvement plan around that so that you can eventually achieve certification. So I know I flew through that last part real quick, but I hope that there are folks that are interested in talking to myself or David more about this screening and what it could do. We use the airport because it is a manageable size project, but we're eager to apply this type of approach in cities, and we are working with several cities to be the leaders on this. But for those of you that are interested, please do get in touch and contact us, and I'll pause there and see what other questions we have.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Very helpful. I think very exciting to sort of really understand where you are and get this holistic, comprehensive look at your situation, your utility, your campus, and make judgments and decisions based on that better information. So just for those of you, if this has piqued your interest, then there's a couple of opportunities to learn more at future webinars. You can join one or both. Just click the link shown here when you get your copy of the slides. Forward it if you want to a link to colleagues who might benefit. On June 9, we'll talk more about lessons learned from early peer participants, get some advice and best practices from those who've gone before. And then on July 14th, we'll really go in depth on the resiliency aspect. And here's how to get in touch with any of us. So do please watch for the slides, do register for those future seminars, do forward information to your colleagues. So all that remains for me is to say thank you to David Chiesa, Senior Director of Business Development at S&C Electric, and to Jamie Statter, Vice President of Strategic Relationships at U.S. Green Building Council. And thanks to all of you as well. Hope to see you soon here on June 9th for our next peer webinar. Thanks.